Before we delve into today's story, a tale of love, betrayal, and a brutal end that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the human heart. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the shocking cases we uncover here. Now let's begin. The sprawling estate of Blackwood Manor was a world unto itself, nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside. Its manicured lawns, ancient oak trees, and ivy-covered stone walls spoke of old money and a life of curated perfection. From the outside, it was a fairy tale, but for 24-year-old Alara, it was a gilded cage. Her husband, Marcus Thorne, was 2 decades her senior, a man whose wealth was matched only by his possessiveness. He had plucked her from a life of obscurity, a young art student with dreams as vibrant as the canvases she painted. He had showered her with luxury, with jewels that could ransom a king, and with a lifestyle that was the envy of many. In return, he expected her to be the perfect hostess, the flawless ornament on his arm, and a beautiful, silent testament to his success. Their marriage was a transaction, a silent agreement she had made with her eyes wide open. But the weight of her choice grew heavier with each passing day. Marcus was not a cruel man in the conventional sense. He never raised his voice, nor a hand to her. His cruelty was a quieter, more insidious kind. It was in the way he dismissed her art as a charming hobby, the way he controlled her finances, her friendships, and her time. It was in the chilling absence of warmth in his touch, the polite disinterest in his eyes. Alara's life was a predictable rhythm of charity luncheons, society dinners, and long, silent evenings in the cavernous halls of Blackwood Manor. She had everything a woman could ever want, and yet, she had nothing. The vibrant colors of her spirit were fading, replaced by a muted gray of quiet desperation. Then came Julian. He arrived with the summer, a young landscape designer hired by Marcus to breathe new life into the estate's neglected gardens. He was the antithesis of her husband in every way. Where Marcus was cold and imposing, Julian was warm and vibrant. His hands, calloused and stained with earth, were a stark contrast to Marcus's soft, manicured ones. His laughter, rich and uninhibited, echoed through the gardens, a sound so alien in the sterile environment of the manor. Their first encounter was by the old, forgotten rose garden. Alara had sought refuge there, her sketchbook in hand, trying to capture the wild, untamed beauty of the climbing roses. Julian had approached her not as the lady of the manor, but as a fellow artist. He spoke of light and shadow, of the way a flower could tell a story, of the passion that drove a creator. For the first time in years, Alara felt seen. Their conversations became a daily ritual. She would find excuses to walk through the gardens, her sketchbook a flimsy pretext for their stolen moments. He would tell her of his travels, of his dreams of creating gardens that were not just beautiful, but alive with emotion. She, in turn, opened up about her art, her passion, her suffocating loneliness. The emotional affair soon bled into a physical one. Their first kiss was a tempest, a collision of pent-up longing and desperate need, hidden away in the cool, fragrant shade of the glass conservatory. With Julian, Alara felt alive again. The gray that had enveloped her world exploded into a riot of color. His touch was a revelation, his words a balm to her starved soul. Their affair was a dangerous dance, a secret whispered in hushed tones and conveyed in fleeting glances. They knew the risks. Marcus was a man who did not tolerate betrayal. His reach was long, his influence vast. But in their bubble of illicit passion, the danger only served to heighten the thrill. The turning point came on a cool autumn evening. Marcus had hosted one of his lavish dinner parties. Alara, dressed in a gown of shimmering silk, had played her part to perfection, the gracious hostess with the dazzling smile. But her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the garden where she knew Julian was working late. Later that night, as she lay in their cold, opulent bedroom, Marcus confronted her. He had noticed her distraction, the faraway look in her eyes. He didn't accuse her of infidelity, not directly. His methods were more subtle. "You seem distant, my dear," he had said, his voice smooth as silk but laced with steel. "Perhaps you're spending too much time on your little hobby. I think it's time we took a long vacation, just the two of us. A remote island, perhaps. No distractions." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. A remote island. A gilded cage within a gilded cage. The thought sent a chill down Alara's spine. It was then that she realized the true extent of her entrapment. Marcus would never let her go. The next day, she met Julian in their secret spot. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a new, terrifying understanding. She told him of Marcus's veiled threat, of the chilling finality in his tone. "He'll never let me go, Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't run. He'll find us. He'll destroy you." Julian held her, his arms a protective shield against the cold fear that gripped her. He looked into her eyes, his own gaze hardening with a grim resolve. "Then we'll have to make sure he can't," he said, his voice low and steady. The words, once spoken, could not be unsaid. They hung between them, a dark and seductive promise. Murder. The thought was monstrous, a grotesque distortion of their love. But in their desperation, it began to take shape, to twist itself into a viable, and perhaps the only solution. The idea, born of fear and desperation, began to take root in the fertile ground of their all-consuming passion. They were no longer just lovers. They were conspirators, bound by a secret that would either set them free or condemn them forever. The gilded cage had to be broken, and they had just found the key. The decision, once made, cast a long, dark shadow over their clandestine affair. The stolen moments of passion were now tainted with a chilling purpose. Every whispered endearment was punctuated by a hushed discussion of methods and alibis. The conservatory, once their sanctuary of love, became a war room where they plotted the death of Marcus Thorne. Julian, practical and methodical, took the lead. He spent hours on the dark web, researching poisons, untraceable weapons, and ways to stage a crime scene. Alara, her mind a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline, focused on the details of the manor, the staff schedules, the blind spots in the security system. They decided against poison. It was too slow, too traceable. A staged robbery seemed the most plausible option. Blackwood Manor, with its priceless art and antiques, was a natural target. They chose a Thursday night. Marcus's security chief was on his annual leave, and the two junior guards on duty were known to be less than diligent. Marcus had a weekly routine of working late in his study on Thursdays, poring over his vast financial empire, a bottle of expensive single malt by his side. It was a routine that would prove fatal. The weapon was a heavy, ornate letter opener from Marcus's own desk, a gift from a business associate. It was sharp, solid, and untraceable. Julian would be the one to wield it. Alara's role was to ensure the coast was clear and to be the grieving, hysterical widow who discovers the tragedy. The week leading up to the murder was a blur of heightened senses and frayed nerves. The irony was suffocating. On the chosen Thursday, a palpable tension hung in the air. Julian arrived at the estate under the guise of checking on some newly installed irrigation systems, a task that would keep him on the grounds after dark. He wore dark clothing, his face grim, a coil of rope and a pair of gloves hidden in his work bag. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Alara's part began. She complained of a severe migraine, a plausible excuse to retire to her bedroom early. She kissed Marcus goodnight, her lips brushing against his cheek, a Judas kiss that sent a wave of nausea through her. "Work hard, my dear," she had whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. In her room, she waited, the minutes stretching into an eternity. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside her window, sent a jolt of panic through her. She had disabled the security camera in the hallway leading to the study, a simple task she had practiced for weeks. At precisely 11:30 p.m., Julian slipped into the house through a side door Alara had left unlocked. He moved like a phantom through the silent corridors, his heart pounding in his ears. He found Marcus in his study, just as they had planned. The older man was engrossed in his papers, his back to the door. The act itself was brutal and swift. There was no struggle, no last words, just a sudden, violent end. Julian struck with a chilling efficiency, the ornate letter opener finding its mark. Marcus slumped forward onto his desk, the life draining out of him in an instant. Julian's hands trembled as he worked to stage the scene. He ransacked the room, pulling books from shelves, appending drawers, and pocketing a few valuable trinkets to complete the illusion of a robbery. He then slipped out of the house, disappearing into the darkness of the night, leaving behind a scene of carefully orchestrated chaos. An hour later, Ilara descended the grand staircase, feigning concern that Marcus had not yet come to bed. She walked to the study, her hand trembling as she pushed open the heavy oak door. The scream that tore from her throat was not entirely feigned. The sight of her husband, lifeless and surrounded by the carnage they had created, was a visceral shock that her mind had not fully prepared for. The 911 call was a masterpiece of panicked hysteria. Her performance was flawless. The police arrived to find a grieving widow, barely coherent, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. The initial investigation went exactly as they had planned. The junior security guards were reprimanded for their negligence. The cause of death was determined to be a result of the robbery. The local police, unaccustomed to such high-profile crimes, seemed to accept the narrative at face value. But they hadn't counted on Detective Inspector Harding. He was a veteran of the force, a man with tired eyes that missed nothing. He was brought in from the city to oversee the case, and from the moment he stepped into the chaotic study, he felt a prickle of doubt. Harding was a man of details. He noted the lack of forced entry. He questioned why the thieves had taken only a few small, easily traceable items, leaving behind priceless paintings. But most of all, he was intrigued by the young widow. Her grief, while theatrical, seemed to lack a certain depth. There was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He began to dig quietly and persistently. He interviewed the staff, the friends, the business associates. A picture began to emerge of a cold, controlling husband and a young, unhappy wife. He requested Ilara's phone records, a standard procedure, but one that would prove to be the first thread in the unraveling of their perfect crime. The day after the murder, Ilara and Julian had allowed themselves a brief, triumphant phone call. It was a mistake, a moment of hubris that would seal their fate. The call, though short, was enough to establish a link between the grieving widow and the handsome landscape designer. Harding, a man who believed in patterns, found the timing of the call suspicious. He delved into Julian's background, discovering his frequent presence at the manor. He started to connect the dots, the seemingly random pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The perfect crime was beginning to show its imperfections. The dance with death was far from over, and the lead investigator was now listening to their music. Detective Inspector Harding was a patient man. He understood that a lie, no matter how well constructed, was a fragile thing. All it needed was a little pressure, a persistent push, and it would inevitably fracture. The phone record was the first crack. A call from the grieving widow to the landscape designer at 7 a.m., the morning after her husband's brutal murder, was more than just a coincidence. It was an anomaly. Harding pulled Julian in for a routine interview. Julian, confident in their plan, was calm and composed. He offered his condolences, spoke of Marcus in respectful tones, and answered every question with a practiced ease. He claimed Ilara had called him to cancel his work for the week, a plausible explanation. But Harding was watching his eyes, the subtle shift when he mentioned Ilara's name, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. Harding's team began a meticulous deep dive into the lives of Ilara and Julian. They canvassed the village, talking to shopkeepers and pub owners. They discovered whispers of the young wife and the handsome gardener, of lingering glances and quiet conversations that seemed a little too familiar. They found a local jeweler who recalled Julian purchasing a delicate silver locket, a locket that was conspicuously absent from Ilara's possession. The pressure mounted. Harding brought Ilara in for a second interview. He changed his approach, shifting from gentle condolence to pointed inquiry. He laid out a timeline of the night, questioning her story about the migraine, the timing of her discovery, her relationship with the staff. He watched her composure begin to fray at the edges. "It's a small village, Mrs. Thorne," Harding said, his voice deceptively mild. "People talk. They notice things. A beautiful woman like you. A young, handsome man working so closely." Alara's facade of the grieving widow began to crack. A flash of anger, of defiance, crossed her face before she could mask it. It was the confirmation Harding needed. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A junior IT technician on Harding's team, tasked with recovering data from the Manor's security system, found an anomaly. The camera in the hallway leading to the study had been manually disabled for a 2-hour window on the night of the murder. But he also found a secondary, cloud-based backup system Marcus had installed, a system no one, not even Alara, knew about. The footage was grainy, but the images were damning. It showed Julian, his face partially obscured by a cap, slipping down the hallway towards the study. It then showed him leaving, his pace hurried, a dark stain on his sleeve. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, Harding brought them in again, this time placing them in separate interrogation rooms. The game was over. He started with Julian. He didn't show him the video at first. Instead, he let him talk, let him build his web of lies, knowing he held the key to its complete destruction. He presented Julian with the phone records, the witness statements, the story of the locket. Julian denied everything, his voice steady, his resolve unwavering. Then Harding played the video. The color drained from Julian's face. The confident facade crumbled, replaced by a raw, primal fear. He stared at the screen, at his own ghost-like image sealing his fate. The silence in the room was deafening. Harding leaned forward. "She's in the next room, Julian. Right now, she's telling us it was all your idea. That you were obsessed with her, that you forced her into it. She's the grieving widow of a wealthy man. You're the help. Who do you think they'll believe?" It was a classic interrogation tactic, a calculated lie designed to break him. And it worked. The thought of Alara, the woman he had killed for, betraying him was the final blow. His loyalty, his love, shattered in an instant. The story came pouring out of him, a torrent of confession, of details, of the passion that had twisted into a murderous plot. He confessed everything, hoping to save himself by sacrificing her. In the adjacent room, Alara maintained her composure, denying everything with a chilling conviction. But when Harding entered and informed her of Julian's full confession, her carefully constructed world fell apart. The woman who had calmly planned her husband's murder finally broke down, her sobs echoing the tragic and pathetic end to her desperate bid for freedom. The trial was a media sensation. The story of the beautiful young wife and her lover, of their passionate affair and the cold-blooded murder of the wealthy, older husband, was a lurid tale that captivated the public. The evidence was overwhelming. The video, the confession, the trail of digital and circumstantial evidence that Harding and his team had so painstakingly pieced together. In the end, there was no escape from the consequences of their actions. They were both found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The gilded cage Alara had so desperately tried to escape had been replaced by a concrete one, her life of luxury traded for a future of regret. Blackwood Manor, once a symbol of wealth and power, now stood as a monument to a tragic and brutal crime. Its manicured gardens, the very place where a fatal love had blossomed, grew wild and untamed, a silent testament to the destructive power of a passion that had burned too brightly, and a freedom that had been sought through the darkest of means. The case was closed, the lovers condemned, and the silence that returned to the rolling hills was heavier and more permanent than ever before. 10 years. A decade is an eternity when measured in the silent count of days within a concrete cell. The vibrant colors Alara had once desperately sought to bring back into her life had been bleached away, replaced by the unyielding gray of a prison uniform and the pale, flat light of fluorescent bulbs. The gilded cage of Blackwood Manor seemed like a fantastical dream compared to the stark, unadorned reality of the HMP Eastwood Park Women's Prison. Alara was no longer the frightened, passionate 24-year-old who had gambled her soul for a man's touch. Prison had been a crucible, burning away her naivety and forging something harder, more brittle in its place. In the beginning, despair had been a constant companion, a heavy shroud she couldn't shrug off. But over time, that despair had hardened into a quiet, cold resolve. She survived. That was her only goal. Her art, the very essence of her former self, had returned to her in a new, starker form. She had no oils, no vibrant pigments. She had charcoal stolen from the art therapy classes and the rough, gray paper of prison-issue notepads. She sketched the faces of her fellow inmates, capturing the tired lines of regret and the fleeting glimmers of defiance in their eyes. She sketched the barred windows and the stark shadows they cast on the floor. Her art was no longer about beauty. It was about truth, a brutal, unforgiving truth she could no longer escape. She rarely thought of Marcus anymore. His face was a blurry memory, a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The guilt she felt for his death was a dull, chronic ache, not the sharp, stabbing pain of fresh grief. It was a part of her, like a scar that had long since healed over, a permanent reminder of the wound beneath. Her feelings for Julian, however, were a different matter entirely. The all-consuming love that had driven her to murder had slowly, painfully, curdled into a profound and bitter resentment. In the quiet solitude of her cell, she replayed their story over and over. She saw now that their love wasn't a grand passion, but a shared desperation. He had not been her savior. He had been the catalyst for her damnation. She blamed him for his weakness, for the confession that had brought their carefully constructed world crashing down. He had been so quick to betray her to save himself, shattering the illusion that what they had was sacred. He had promised her freedom, but had only delivered a smaller, colder cage. Hundreds of miles away, in a men's high-security prison, Julian was living in his own private hell. The ghost that haunted him was not Marcus, but Alara. Her face, as he remembered it from their last moments in the interrogation room's mask of cold fury and betrayal was seared into his memory. Unlike Alara, who had compartmentalized their past, Julian was consumed by it. His guilt was a living thing, a parasite that fed on his soul. He had taken a life, and in doing so, had destroyed the life of the only woman he had ever loved. He clung to the memory of their love with a desperate tenacity, for it was the only thing that gave his monstrous act any meaning. Without their love, he was not a tragic hero. He was simply a murderer. He wrote to her. Every week, for 10 years, he wrote a letter. The first few years, they were filled with frantic apologies, with desperate pleas for forgiveness, with declarations of his undying love. As the years wore on and the silence from her end remained unbroken, the letters changed. They became a diary, a confession to a ghost. He told her about his days, about the crushing monotony of prison life, about the dreams he still had of the gardens at Blackwood Manor. He told her he still loved her. He told her he was sorry. He begged her to write back, just once, to let him know she remembered. The letters always arrived at Eastwood Park. A guard, a stern woman in her 50s, would slide the familiar envelope under Alara's cell door. Alara would pick it up, her fingers tracing the familiar, looping handwriting on the front. For a moment, she would feel a flicker of something, a ghost of the old warmth, a pang of curiosity. But it would be extinguished as quickly as it came. She never opened them, not a single one. Each letter was placed in a small cardboard box she kept under her cot. The box was nearly full now, a heavy archive of a love she had systematically erased from her heart. To read them would be to let him back in, to let the poison of the past seep back into the fragile peace she had constructed. Her refusal was her last act of power, her final, silent rejection of the man who had co-authored her ruin. The world outside, of course, had moved on. Blackwood Manor had been sold at auction. The new owners, a tech billionaire with no sense of history, had renovated the estate, replacing the classic English decor with stark minimalism. They had paved over the old rose garden, the place where Alara and Julian had first connected, to build a tennis court. The wild, passionate garden Julian had so lovingly crafted had been tamed and sterilized, its story erased from the landscape. The murder at Blackwood Manor had faded from the headlines, becoming just another lurid tale for true crime podcasts. A ghost story whispered to tourists. One evening, as the light faded outside her barred window, Elara was sketching. She worked with an intense focus, the charcoal stick moving swiftly across the page. She was drawing a face, but it was a composite of features, a collage of her memory. It had Marcus's cold, disappointed eyes, Julian's pleading mouth, and her own hollow cheekbones. It was the face of her own personal monster, the embodiment of her guilt, her regret, and her loss. She had killed for freedom, only to discover that true freedom was not an absence of walls, but a quiet conscience. And that was a freedom she would never know again. The silence in her cell was absolute, broken only by the scratching of charcoal on paper, the sound of a woman forever trying to draw her way out of a past that would never let her go.